Welcome to the Lead Change podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Mulcahey. I'm an orthopedic sports medicine surgeon with a huge interest in contributing to the growth and development of other leaders. On this podcast, we will share stories from many leaders in all medical specialties to understand the skills necessary to be an effective leader. We'll celebrate their success and hear about strategies to overcome hurdles. We will also highlight some of the unique challenges faced by women in medicine who are interested in pursuing leadership positions and the importance of mentorship, sponsorship, and allyship in achieving and being successful in those roles. Let's work together, build on shared experiences, learn from those before us, and use these lessons to propel us forward in our career. Let's lead change. Welcome, everyone, to the Lead Change podcast. I am really honored to have Dr. Tom Collins on the podcast with us today. Dr. Collins is a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Cardiology and the vice chair of faculty and academic affairs in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Kentucky College of Medicine. He completed his undergraduate degree in chemistry at Tennessee Technological University. He completed medical school at the University of Tennessee College of Medicine and his residency in internal medicine and pediatrics at the University of Tennessee Health Sciences Center. After that, he completed pediatric cardiology fellowship at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and remained there for an advanced fellowship in adult congenital heart disease and non-invasive imaging. He's an internationally recognized expert in the cardiovascular complications of Williams syndrome and a nationally recognized authority on genetically mediated aortopathies and arteriopathies. And his research spans the full spectrum of biomedical investigation from laboratory science and computational modeling to innovative imaging techniques and large population-based clinical studies. He has published extensively, in fact, over 150 peer-reviewed manuscripts, 6 book chapters, and 2 books. He is definitely an expert. In recent years, Dr. Collins has expanded his scholarship into the science of leadership. After earning a Master of Science in Leadership from the Citadel, he conducted an extensive research project interviewing 51 retired U.S. 4-star generals, incredible, and admirals to understand the principles behind exceptional leadership. Those insights form the basis of his award-winning book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, as well as his podcast, The Science of Leadership, where he explores leadership through conversations with accomplished leaders across many fields. We are definitely going to dive into those things. Dr. Collins is currently pursuing a PhD in educational leadership. I was introduced to Tom virtually in April by one of my colleagues from the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine program when she heard of my interest in leadership and faculty development. Tom and I met via Zoom to discuss our shared interests, and I was really excited to learn about his background, the work he did to prepare for and write his book, and his incredibly successful leadership-focused podcast. I'm really looking forward to having Tom share some of the lessons he has learned through his journey. Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Mary, thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be on here, and I'm always excited to talk about leadership stuff, so really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So before we dive into all of the leadership content, which there is so much, I was hoping you could start by sharing a little bit with us about your clinical practice and some of your areas of interest and expertise.
Yeah, so I do about 30% of my time now is clinical because a lot of it is in the leadership and research space, but about 30% is clinical. And so I try to focus mainly on children and young adults who have genetic syndromes that affect the heart and vascular tree. And so I really kind of focus on that. But I also do inpatient work and so forth too, seeing the patients that are in the hospital.
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying. I know some of those, even doing the introduction, some of those words are words that I don't say all the time. So thank you for providing some background. And I know a lot of your time obviously now is dedicated to leadership focused stuff. So I did not mention specifically in an introduction, but you previously told me that you served in the military. So thank you so much for your service to our nation. From 2012 to 2014, specifically, you served as a lieutenant colonel in the Arkansas Air National Guard, the 189th Medical Group in Little Rock Air Force Base, Arkansas, and you were chief of clinical services and surgeon general of the hospital. So can you tell us about what that role entailed?
Sure. Yeah, so that was near the end of my military time, and so I was basically, if you want to think of it, like the CMO of the hospital. That's what's called the SGH, or Surgeon General Hospital, really is. And so I was overseeing the operations of all the clinical components. That actually included dentistry, because in the medical group, we had medicine, which broke out into surgery, medical care, ICU, and then we had dentistry, we have a lab, and so on. So it was overseeing all of that and being ready to deploy at a moment's notice. So a medical unit like the 189th at Little Rock Air Force Base, has to be able to stand up and deploy within 24 hours of notification, be able to set up a fully operational field hospital within 72 hours anywhere on the planet. So we had the capabilities to load up C-130s out of Little Rock Air Force Base. I had been in Memphis Air National Guard 164th Medical Group in Memphis, Tennessee before that. And that's where the C-5 Galaxy flies, which is the largest airframe in the world. And basically we could load up and fly anywhere in the world and stand up in what are called Alaska tents, a fully functioning hospital. And in that setting, I was over the ICU. So would take care of, because I'm trained in adults and pediatrics, I took care of anybody in the ICU setting. So, but that's what I did there near the end of my time with the 189th in Little Rock.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, incredible on so many fronts. Like, one, overseeing so many people, so many physicians, so many other healthcare related staff, and so many different types of specialties, and making sure everyone's coordinated and get them working together, and be prepared to deploy on such short notice and be ready to set up, as you said, a fully functional hospital anywhere in the world. And so that requires a tremendous amount of preparation and practice. And I'm sure you guys were doing drills and everything, just being ready, because of course you never know when that's going to happen. So I wonder too, you said that was sort of the tail end of your military career, but just in general, what were some of the most important leadership lessons that you learned during your time in the military? And how do you feel like that maybe helped lay the foundation for the other leadership roles that you've held in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a challenging question because to some degree, it's hard to identify when did I learn X or Y or Z, But as I look back on my time in the military, and even to this day, what I reflect on most is relationship. And, most people think that military leadership is about command and control, and that's totally wrong. I need to be able to tell you to do something when it is hitting the fan, and I need you to do it. But up until that point, all the backdrop is relationship. It's about developing the relationship and the trust so that when I say, Mary, do X, you know that there's a reason I've asked you to do it, and you do it. Okay? The Hollywood picture is just somebody is just yelling at somebody to do X, right? And they don't paint the picture that all that relationship building that led up to that moment when you trusted me that if he says I need to do this thing, I need to charge into this building or whatever it is, then we need to do it. That's the thing that I would take away, that I would say most, is that it's about relationship. It's about building that trust. And then once you do that, that's the things. To this day, the people that I could call on at any moment right now, even though I might not have seen them in years, I could pick up my phone and say, Bondus, I need you. Coven, I need you. They would be there.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that's such a great point that you made, that it is all about relationships and developing that trust. And the military is a unique setting, but that applies to what we do in medicine, to leadership roles, to just working with your team in clinic. But it is, that relationship is so important when you know each other, you trust each other, you understand the reason for needing to do things. And I think, it's a special bond too that you create with your other colleagues that are in the military. And we hope that we can establish that sense of connection too in our teams in medicine. And so that it doesn't matter if, maybe you were in one position and then you moved and you're at a different institution, but you still have that connection and can rely on each other. So that point is so important and really broadly applicable. So thank you for emphasizing that. And you currently serve as Vice Chair of Faculty and Academic Affairs in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Kentucky. And as you entered into that position, because I think you've been in the position for a few years now, how long?
Yeah, it'll be 4 years in August, yeah.
4 years. All right, goes fast. But as you entered into that position, what were some of your main goals as you took over?
Yeah, so I was on the West Coast. We were on the West Coast before moving to Kentucky. And so the move to this role was really moving to doing more of what motivates me most, which is helping other people do great things. My purpose on earth really is to help other people achieve great things. It's not about me and what I accomplish, because ultimately my success is the success of other people. So coming into this role, that's what was really focused on. Here are these people that are working in this academic setting, who are trying to build careers, who are trying to do things for children. How can I help them move toward their potential, to the greatest degree, and help them build careers that are successful and fulfilling. And so that really was the motivation for moving into this role.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love that also that at the same time you answered a question that I would have asked you separately. Like, I think that it's so important for everyone to understand what is their why, their purpose, like motivation. And you came outright because it's so integral to what you're doing, right? So I absolutely love that your purpose is to help other people, right, achieve great things. It's fantastic. And clearly you are doing that in so many different ways. And despite only knowing you now for a relatively short period of time, I have already seen that impact. And in the 4 years that you've been there and you've been in this position, are there any specific initiatives that you have been able to maybe help implement that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, so I can say pretty resolutely that our department, which encompasses about 200 faculty plus ancillary, APPs and so on, but about 200 physician faculty, when I arrived, was smaller, certainly, but didn't have real clarified, formalized faculty development program for the department. And so basically I was able to work with our team here and build that. And that includes things like career development committees for our junior faculty so that they're tracking along toward promotion. So it's not suddenly this thing that's thrown at them at year 5 or 6, but they're building toward it over time so it's easy to achieve. And they know what the metrics are and they know what's expected of them and they know how to do it well. So that's something that I can point to and say, hey, that didn't exist. That exists now. And it's really something that has aided in, and the other things that I've been able to do has developed a culture of professional development that has become an ethos in our department that I would say was lacking when I got here. And so I could say that's a really big achievement. I'm excited because in a couple of months, we're going to be launching our departmental leadership development program that'll be based on my book. And then I've got a companion development guide that we're going to be publishing next month. And so we're going to be using that as a physician leadership development program for our department. So I'm excited that's forthcoming, and we got other things that we do too. And so there are a number of things, but I would say overall, the biggest thing is developing this culture that we're about helping our folks build their careers and achieve big things. And so I think that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that is fantastic. So, wow, so many things there. I mean, I agree with you completely, like how important it is to have a program, have a faculty development program and all that it encompasses, where it's leadership, it's moving towards promotion, it's, helping people achieve whatever it is their goals are, if it's research related or other things in their career. And you and I are definitely on the same page with that. And I certainly aspire to have a position similar to what you have to help implement similar things. But fantastic examples, right? Having a career development program really focused on the junior faculty, that's so critical. Like, you start in practice and you feel like you don't know anything. Like, you're just trying to see patients and do surgery, do procedures. And it's sort of some of this other stuff. Maybe you're like, you don't know what you should be doing or how you should be making note of it, or little things that will add to your growth and development. And so I think that that's really great and so integral to have a program and some guidelines and criteria to help those faculty know what they're working towards. And the point that you made too about creating a culture of professional development, right? So expand on that a little bit, Tom. Like, what do you mean? So, and for maybe people listening who may not understand the difference between faculty development, professional development, like when you say a culture of professional development, what are you referring to?
Yeah, so it's this idea. I mean, I think in some organizations, and we're talking about academic medicine at this moment, but you finish and people treat you like suddenly you're this finished product, right? Like you did residency, let's say, and maybe you went straight into faculty as a general, in this case, pediatrician. Maybe you did fellowship and you come out and now you're a first year neonatologist, endocrinologist, whateverologist, and people treat you like you're supposed to know everything and you're done. And sometimes faculty members have had that in their head, that they're finished product, and they're not. None of us should be. And so helping people to understand that accomplishing great things in academic medicine in particular, where there are all these hoops that you have to jump through, these metrics you have to meet to get promoted from assistant professor, where you were first appointed, to associate professor to full professor, there's a pathway toward that. And there are accomplishments that you have to reach to be an associate professor, a metric that essentially any organization or any academic institution across the country will use is regional reputation. So anybody in an adjoining state, let's say, would say, well, yes, I've heard of Tom Collins. And if you want to be a full professor, you have to be national or international reputation. Well, yes, I've heard of Tom Collins. Somebody in Germany, let's say, has heard of Tom Collins and his work. And so those are kind of standard metrics, but then there are other things. And helping people to see that that's important, but also you want to develop for the sake of growing and being better in your career, that this is something you're going to be doing for 30, 40 years, however long. How about being good at it, right? How about getting fulfillment out of it so you don't get burnt out, so that you don't want to leave medicine? You want to continue to invest in it and to improve the organization and the care of children and the training of trainees and all that goes with it. So helping people to start seeing that as a faculty, as a senior faculty member, as a full professor, my role isn't just to be worried about me and what I'm doing. Hey, here's this junior faculty person. I'm going to pour into them. And I actually get something back from that. And so now we've got these people that are sitting in these career development committees. They're pouring into these other people, and that helps them grow their careers. And then we've got stuff for mid-career faculty and so on to help them grow. And so suddenly it becomes, hey, it's not just me doing my thing. It's us, and we're all trying to get better. And I've got a role in helping this person get better and that person get better, and everybody's helping me get better. And so it becomes this culture, this expectation that we're not all just sitting around. How are you getting better? How are you improving? What are the goals that you have for next year, next 5 years, next 10 years, whatever it may be? So it's that sort of thing with regard to building the culture.
Yeah, I think that is just such a critical point, and I hope everyone listening takes that away, that when you finish training, like, you're by no means done. That's the start, really, and you just continue to grow from there, and having that sort of culture, that dedication and motivation and aspiration, for that matter, to continue to grow for yourself, for your team, the department, and really for our patients. They all benefit from these continued efforts, like continuing to learn not only clinically, but growing as a leader. Everyone benefits from that. And so that's fantastic how you explained that. I think it's so important to have that outlook, in academic medicine, but also just in sort of our lives in general, in practice. It really, ultimately, it all benefits our patients. And that's the most important thing. And you ended when you were talking about the initiatives you've helped implement with regards to faculty development in your department, talking about this leadership program that's going to be based on your book. And that is so amazing. And I can't wait to hear how that plays out. And if there's ever a virtual option, maybe you can let us know about that too, because I would like to take part. But when is that going to be rolled out?
Yeah, so right now we're working on the development guide, so that goes along with the book. And so it's another book basically, but it's a workbook, right? And I originally laid it out for a 12-week sort of process, but for our faculty, we're going to do it over basically every other week. We'll meet instead of weekly. So it'll end up being about a 6-month leadership development training program, and people will read a chapter of the book, and then they'll work through a chapter in the workbook, and then we'll have discussions that apply to the material that we've covered. And so that's going to be launching probably either mid-August or into September or something like that. And so I'm excited about it. Right now, we're still doing some of the editing, the internal design. There's a lot that goes into a book. If you've never had an opportunity, most people out there have never had an opportunity to write a book and to know what all goes into it. But like the font, the things just like the font that is chosen and how boxes are shaded and like all this stuff, right? So I'm working with the internal designer, like, okay, what do I want it to look like? And where's this going to be? And how about we box that and make that gray a little darker? And this, and all these different facets of it. And then the cover is being designed right now and everything. So theoretically, a month-ish from now, it'll be actually available. That workbook will be available. And so it's exciting time.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, good luck. And so I will work on reading the book over the summer, and then we'll regroup. No, but it's so exciting. I'm excited for your faculty just to have the opportunity to do that.
Thanks.
So I mentioned in the introduction that you obtained your Master of Science in Leadership from the Citadel. So congratulations, really, that is amazing. I wonder though, how did you decide to obtain that degree? And really, how has that helped you in your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's sort of interesting. So basically, throughout training at different levels and so on, and then afterward, people kept foisting upon me, someday you'll be a division chief or a department chair or some kind of higher role. And I wasn't sure that was correct. And I was trying to wrestle with that. And so where I was previously in about 2018, I started reading. I was like, okay, if that's going to happen, I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know that I want it to happen, but if it's going to happen, I want to be the best possible chief, chair, whatever that I can be. So I'm going to start devoting my attention and my energy to that. I read a lot. I spend a lot of time on the stationary bike and I read when I'm doing that. And so I basically said, okay, I'm just going to start reading leadership books. And so that was in about March of 2018. And about a year and a half of time, I read about 140 books or something on leadership. And I felt like I've got my hands around at least what's in the lay literature. I understand these concepts. But I'm probably missing something. And I'd like to have a formal framework for how to think about leadership more systematically. And so I tried to look for a master's in leadership and something that was online because I was on the West Coast and I had a full-time job and kids and wife and all that. And so it wasn't like I was going to go to a full-time master's degree every day or whatever. And so then I came across the Citadel program and I knew I grew up in Tennessee. And so I knew about the Citadel when I was growing up, and I was like, hey, this is a great institution. They really focus on leadership development. And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to do this. So I started that in 2020, January of 2020, which was very fortuitous, and then ended up completing it in May of 22. So it was a 2-year program. Had a tremendous time. It was really great to go, as somebody who's the professor, right, who's supposed to be teaching all the time. It was really fun to go back into student mode and to be wrestling with material that I was really interested in. If I go back to medical school, neuroscience was not something I was interested in, right? But I had to do it. But this was all stuff that was directly applicable to what I was really interested in doing, really interested in accomplishing. And so it was so fun to do that. And that spurred me to think, okay, maybe I'm just going to be an ongoing student for the rest of my, adult life. And so now I'm doing this PhD or whatever, and I've already got plans for what's the next thing after that, just because I have a lot of fun. It's work, and you got to read all this stuff and you got to write these papers, but it's fun. And that degree was what led to me doing the research and writing the book that I wrote. And I can tell you, Mary, there is nothing that I've done. So again, for those listening, I'm a pediatric cardiologist. I take care of children whose hearts are messed up, right? And I will say there's nothing professionally that I've done that has been more impactful on me than that work, that leadership study with the 4-star generals and admirals and the resultant book that came from it. Far and away has had the greatest impact on me as a person and so forth. So whether or not I learned anything in the master's, which I feel I did, that was the greatest outcome from it because it spurred me to actually accomplish that.
Yeah, that is amazing and really a perfect lead in because I wanted to ask you about that next. But I love that the master's led to that. And I don't know if you had to do a research project as part of your master's or if it just kind of stimulated that interest.
Yeah, so I had to do with different courses, I had to do different sorts of projects and write these big papers and things like that. And so I did other things. So I was doing a lot more than was required, just because I suddenly was like, hey, I can do research in leadership, like I've been doing all this research in congenital heart disease and all that and genetic syndromes and whatnot, but here's this field in leadership. I could do stuff in that. So I got excited about that. And it's a totally different thing, like coming from the science side of the house to this sort of stuff. Totally different. So it's learning an entirely new language and how to operate and all that, but really fun, huge amount of growth. And it spurred me to do other studies and things since then. So yeah.
I love that. One thing led to the next. So as you've been mentioning, and we talked about briefly in the introduction, so you interviewed 51 4-star generals, which is really an incredible feat. But for those listening, right, who may not be aware, can you explain a little bit what it means to be a 4-star general?
Sure. Yeah. So just to give you an idea, this was an insane idea. When I came up with this idea, I was going to interview 50. I'm going to interview. I didn't know any Okay. And most people don't know any. Most people in the military don't know any. I talked to a 3-star general and said, "Hey, can you connect me with a 4-star?" And he said, "I don't know any," which was insane. That wasn't entirely true. He knew some. He just didn't have the relationship to approach them. And so, when I started, I didn't know how to contact them. They don't put, because these are the highest ranking officers in our military. And they have been in places and done things that lead other people around the world to want to kill them. So they're not out looking for people to talk to. They're not out putting their names on the internet. It's very hard to reach them, most of them. And so I didn't know that. I just had this crazy idea that I was going to do this study and write a book that was the leadership wisdom of 4-star generals and admirals, and their stories that, that showcase what that leadership lesson looks like and all this sort of thing. And so I was thinking about that, and I didn't know that in the history of the United States of America, there have only been about 900 4-star generals and admirals. There are only about 250 living. And so I had effectively said, I'm going to interview 20% of all living 4-star generals and admirals. That was the stupidest idea in the world. But my ignorance served me well, because if I had known how stupid it was, how ridiculous this idea was, I would have never pursued it. But I didn't know, right? And so eventually, I was at Stanford at the time, when I started the study, and the Hoover Institute is there, and they have a couple of 4-stars there, usually on their faculty. And somebody gave me the idea, "Hey, why don't you contact one of those guys?" So I did. And amazingly, General Jim Mattis, who was our Secretary of Defense at one point, said he would be happy to speak with me about this. And that got the ball rolling. And at the end of every interview, I would say, "Hey, can you connect me with 5 other 4-stars?" And they're in this guild. They all know each other, and they don't give out the information. So they said, I'll email some buddies. And if they want to talk to you, they'll contact you. And so that's how it happened. And so over the course of 9 months, I was able to interview actually 52. One of them was off the record. He didn't want anything quoted. And then there were other people who I approached, and they were skeptical of me and said some things that were like, "Hey, that's not very kind." But anyway, but 51 of them were on the record, and I learned so much. And actually, I wrote a book that's twice as long as the one that we published. So I've got another book basically just waiting to come out down the road some point. So,
wow.
But to give people an idea of what it, back to your point, what it means to be a 4-star, the average time that these people spent in the military in leadership roles was 36 years. 1/3 of that time is in formal leadership training. So 12 years worth of training throughout their careers. The average number of people that they led was 140, with budgets in excess of $12 billion a year, the highest being over $770 billion when General Mattis was Secretary of Defense. And that doesn't include things like material, what we call materiel. That's just their operations and maintenance budget. Okay. They only had numbers for the operations and maintenance. So the Pacific commander of the Navy had on the order of $500 billion worth of ships and planes and helicopters and all that sort of stuff that they're over too. So it's like enormous, beyond most people's comprehension, the leadership roles that these people have held.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for clarifying, because I was definitely in that group of not knowing exactly what it means to be a 4-star general. So I appreciate you, really, really appreciate you clarifying. And that is impressive, really, really impressive. So you, with all of this information, right, you ultimately wrote a book called The 4 Stars of Leadership, right, based on this very extensive work. When you were writing this, and even now as you think about this work, right, who is the book really geared towards, and what do you hope that people are going to take away from reading it?
Yeah, so it's not geared toward military people. First of all, there are people who are like, "Well, that's a military leadership book," right? And that's not true. It's actually not true. It's leadership with wearing a uniform, basically. Okay, what people need to understand is leadership, period. The 4 stars, quote unquote, of leadership that came from my research are character, competence, caring, and communication. Again, third one is caring. People don't think of the military as being caring, but there's a lot of caring. That goes to that trust that I talked about earlier in the relationship building. If you don't care about people, they're not going to care about what you have to say as a leader. And so those 4 things, tell me an organization that doesn't need somebody who's got character, an organization that doesn't need somebody who is competent, knows what they're doing, that cares about their people and can communicate what we're trying to do. That's agnostic of any domain, right? but it's within the context of stories telling people this is what it looks like to live that thing out in the crucible, the hardest crucibles known to mankind, which is war and the theater where people are dying. That's where those stories are coming from, but it frames it so that people can see this is what it looks like. Not all of them are war stories or things of that nature, but it frames it so that people can understand this is what it looks like, right? And so that's ultimately what it's about. You know, when you're putting out a book, they'll do market research and they'll say, who is this aimed at? And what they really want to know is, who can we sell the most books to? Okay. And so then you have to say, well, I can tell you the military is going to be interested in this. Okay. That's just because they're heroes. All right. People in business are going to be interested in it. But at the end of the day, this is a leadership book for anybody. I could change this book up, make it for kids. Okay. Taking the principles, change it up, make it kids playing on baseball teams or basketball or soccer or whatever, you know, or on the theater or in the band or whatever it is, still the same lessons. There's still the same lessons that apply. And so ultimately, anybody can learn from this book. But, you know, if you had to, again, from a marketing analysis standpoint, most likely people that buy it are going to be people in the military and people in business. But I've had a lot of people in medicine who read it, academics of other sorts, you know, science and things of that nature. Some of the people who've posted on reviews on Amazon are not in the military, have no experience whatsoever with the military. And it's funny, Mary, when people tell me, especially in medicine, but and this is common, they'll say, well, that may work in the military, but it won't work in medicine. And that automatically tells me two things. It tells me, A, they don't know anything about the military, and they know even less about leadership, because leadership is leadership. It's just the context.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that that's so true. And there's so many principles that apply just broadly, but I love that it's framed in the context of all these incredible leaders. Yes, they're in the military, but the lessons apply, and that absolutely to medicine. I think that's so critical, and that's why, like, I'm very excited to read it. I wish I could have read it even before this interview, but I'm really excited to read that, to dive into that, to learn from the lessons. And I've picked up a lot from the podcast, and we're going to talk about that too. But really important points that you made about how the lessons just are, yes, framed in the sense of the military, but can be helpful. So funny that, no, it's the military. This doesn't apply to medicine. Oh, it does. It very much applies. And so interesting. And I wonder, you probably found it interesting too, like the kind of four main points or stars or principles that came out of that, right? What did you think as you analyzed all of these interviews and those were kind of the key points that came out? What was your initial sort of reflection?
Well, it was, you know, as you're going through and you're interviewing these people, those things start to bubble out. You start to get the sense that, hey, this is, I mean, I had one person tell me, General Les Lyles from the Air Force, he said, you know, I said, what are the three, I asked them all the same four questions because it was a scientifically designed study, right? And the first question, what are the three most important leadership lessons you learned across your career? And then what are examples of how those played out? And he said, communication, 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 right? And I was like, okay, so communication is important, you know, and then other people they may not say that outright, but they would talk about it in ways like they're talking about communication here. You know, you have to be clear. Like General J.D. Thurman, he told me, you know, he would tell his people, don't put anything in a brief or a memo or anything that has to be interpreted. Make it clear, make it simple. Okay, well, that's communication, right? So you, as you're going through in this kind of research, you're looking at those and you're analyzing what are people saying, but then what are they really saying? What are they really talking about? And then there are people who are like character. Without character, you cannot have leadership. Character is fundamental, right? And then other people are like, well, like General Tony Zinni, he did this study and he's written several books on leadership. He was a Marine Corps general, and he did a study in Vietnam when soldiers were coming back. He was like, what's the most important leadership thing? And they would say, these were Marines, so they said it a different way, but know their stuff. Okay. Right. And that's competence. You know what you're doing. Right. So as you're going along, you're hearing it over and over. And then as the research, I recorded all these, then I had to listen, and then we transcribed them. Then I had to go back and listen and read to make sure the transcription was all correct, you know, over and over. So I can basically go to a place in my mind and hit play, and I can remember what it sounded like when, you know, pick a general or an admiral said something. Like I know exactly the voice, the tone, how they emphasize it, and so on. because there's so much work that goes into it. But it was crazy. Ultimately, it was insane because every time was like this master class. It's just Tom and this person, right? And they're just downloading. Hey, if I only had 3 things to pick out of, average 36 years, all this training, all the crap that I've seen, all the books I've read, all that. If I had 3 things to pick to tell you that are most important, here they are, Tom. And here's a story that goes with it, right? I would just come away like awed by it. And so to have that happen over and over and over and over, it's still like, it's just crazy to me that nobody's ever done a study like this, like to the magnitude of this. It's never been done. And the fact that I got to do it is just so insane to me.
It's incredible. And so many people are benefiting from your work. So thank you. But yeah, it must have just been amazing to sit there one-on-one and have those interviews. And I feel a little bit like that when I do these podcast episodes. And I think it's amazing to have this time and learn from you. And so I appreciate all that you're sharing, honestly.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Leading into this, because I really am so excited to talk about your podcast. So you host a podcast called The Science of Leadership, which is absolutely fantastic. And I really heard about this when you and I met last month. And I've listened to many, many episodes since then, and I am continuously learning. So thank you again. But I wonder, how did you decide to actually create the podcast, and how is it structured overall?
Yeah, I was forced into it. I didn't want to start a podcast. My buddy was like, hey, you're doing all this stuff with these generals and all that. You should do a podcast. That would be really valuable, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, dude, I don't want to be a podcasting guy, like that. That's one more thing I don't have time for, is what it amounted to, right? Like, there's so much time and there's investment, like to have a setup where you got all these lights and all these cameras and having an editor and a producer and all that stuff. I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. I don't like, again, I'm the kind of person, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do the thing. If I'm going to read books on leadership, I'm going to read more than you've ever heard. I'm going to take a master's. I'm going to do a PhD. I'm going to, whatever. And so if I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to go after it. Right. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't, like, I don't have the quote bandwidth but ultimately it was like, he's right. I mean, this could be valuable. And so in 2024, in the spring of 2024, I was like, okay, what would it look like? And I started working on that. And so we started recording in July of 24 and put out the first ones in September, I think, of 24. And we're up to, this week should be episode 90. And so doing that, just putting those out every week, that's a lot of work. And, and this, and thankfully I've got a editor, producer who really helps me with all that. And so basically I put together the podcast episodes and all, and then I'm off to her. I'm like, here, you make it look good, right? Like this. But to your question, so we have a typical, the frame that we use is what, so what, now what? So basically the way it is we have a leadership topic, and most of it comes from my own research as far as from the book. And this is an idea that's really important. And so we take this idea. What could the idea be? Trust. Let's just make it very general. Today we're talking about trust and leadership. And okay, what is that? That's the what component. So it's 3 segments. What? Trust is blah, blah, blah. And we talk about that. And what does trust look like? So we give an example. And then, so what? Okay, why does that matter? Why does trust in leadership actually matter? Well, here's why it matters. And here usually we do 3 studies. We'll talk about 3 studies. Here are 3 studies from the scientific literature that show that if you build trust in your leadership relationships, then you have higher output, people stay at your organization longer, they accomplish more things, innovation's higher, all that sort of stuff. And by the way, those are actually findings from the literature. But then people have, okay, well, wow, trust is actually important. And here's an example of what that looks like. When was trust really important in a given organization or context? And then the third thing, now what? Okay, well, now we've talked about this. We know what it is, why it's important. What do we do about it? How do we activate on it? And usually it'll be, oh, here are 5 things or 6 things or 10 things. We usually try not to do 10, but here's a set of things that you can start doing today, actually improve on that. So that's how the podcast is laid out. I've had probably 20 or so of the 4 stars on as guests. I've had, the president of Hewlett Packard Personal Computing, university presidents, all sorts of people who've been on, and we talk about those things and in depth. So it's been, to your point, the fact that I get to sit and have really fun, meaningful conversations where I learned something, but also we're creating a product for free, actually at a cost to me, but for free to listeners that they can be better, right? So that their organizations or whatever endeavors they're doing can be better at the end of the day. That's really fulfilling to me. I get a lot out of it. It's a lot of work, but I get a lot out of it.
I agree with you completely. I think it's tremendous, the opportunity to do that. And I love the structure of the podcast. And it's a nice mix of one-on-one interviews and then also your sidekick or co-host, your colleague. Those episodes are really nice too, where you kind of focus on a specific topic. So I really encourage everyone listening to check out that podcast too. The Science of Leadership, because it's really fantastic. And I've learned so much about leadership from that. And so switching gears a little bit, I really like to ask my guests this question because I'm always curious to hear the response. So what would you define as your superpower? Meaning, what is one of your biggest strengths that really contributes to your success and helps set you apart from others?
Golly, I don't know that I have a superpower per se. I think that I'm what I call an ever learner. Okay. And that comes out in just the things we've been talking about. I'm an ever learner. And I think that leadership, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be learning every day because the whatever your challenge is, whether it's an actual person, an organization, is getting stronger every day. And if you sit on your laurels, you may be ahead right now. You sit on your laurels, you'll get past. You'll lose out. Your enemy, your adversary, your disease process, whatever, is going to pass you by and you will be ineffective. So I'm an ever learner. That's one thing. I think that is a strength that I would have. And the thing that I've always been really good at, I guess, is writing, and so that's something I could say that I do well. Is a superpower compared to a lot of people, the stuff that I've read, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I would say those are a couple of things I could point to maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. And I think so true. Really important that all of us, that we are continually striving for growth and learning and that we never stay stagnant. I think medicine is a great example of a field. I mean, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. Much of what I do now, I never did in fellowship or residency. Some surgical techniques never had exposure to. So I think it's the desire to constantly be learning.
Take a pause.
But yeah, and I tell our residents, our medical students that too, that you need to understand, yes, when you come out of residency and fellowship that you have a foundation, but we're building. Yeah, but it's again, we have that foundation from our training. We build on that in our practice. And so I think that's a key point. I love that is, a superpower too, that you're always trying to grow and be better than you were the day before. So I want to round out our excellent discussion. And we could keep talking to you for easily another hour. So for sure, I will have you back. Maybe when you have your other book too, or you can talk about your leadership development program at your institution. But I do like to close this out with 3 questions that I like to ask all of my guests. So first for you, this podcast is called Lead Change. And I wonder, what does lead change mean to you?
Yeah, I think to me, they're synonymous. So what I like to tell people is, people don't need a leader to lead them to where they are. They don't need a leader to lead them to stay the same. That's inertia. That's the second law of thermodynamics. People are going to be there. They're going to remain there. People need leaders to help them go somewhere where they're not, where they could be, where they need to go. And that's change. Fundamentally, that's change. It's changing your position. It's changing what you're doing. It's changing your target, whatever it may be. So I see lead change as synonymous, almost as a double helix of DNA, almost that they're interwoven and inseparable. So that would be my response to that question.
That is fantastic. And I have never heard that kind of description with that, but I love that. And I see that so appropriate and really relevant to everything we've talked about. But thanks for framing it in that context. Now, the next question, you've touched on this already a few times throughout our discussion. Now, I know you've read many leadership books and you've written an excellent leadership book, but of those that you've read, that you've had exposure to, are there any leadership books that have been particularly impactful for you?
Yeah, so I do this weird thing at the end of my CV. I actually keep a running list in rank order of the leadership books that I've read, at least since 2018. And so it's up to 400 and almost 490, or no, almost 400. And in it, I rank them, and basically the top 100 at this point are really, really good books. But I would say that I can name off the top 10 for folks. The first is Xenophon's Cyrus the Great, edited by Larry Hedrick. Phenomenal book. The second is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. The third is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. The fourth is what's called Leadership and Self-Deception. That's by a group called the Arbinger Institute. That's a really good book. Five is called Once an Eagle. It's actually a fiction. It's a tome. It's like 1,300 pages. And I'm not a fiction reader. I read nonfiction, but this book is so important in the pantheon of leadership texts that I finally had broken down just this month and read it. And that's an exceptional book. It really shows you what it looks like to do a lot of these principles that are highlighted in my book. 6 is The Mentor Leader by Tony Dungy. 7 is The Leadership Gap by a lady named Lolly Daskell. The next one, 8, I guess it'd be, is the U.S. Army Leadership Field Manual. Number 9 it's called the Armed Forces Officer. The writing in it, I just love the writing because it's somewhat arcane and so on. And then number 10 would be Enchiridion by Epictetus.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much. Those are incredible. And many of those books I have not heard of. So I love that. I love adding those to the list of many books that we're recommending to everyone listening. I think there's so much that you can learn, and awesome too that it's a mix of some nonfiction, fiction, military type books. And there's so many different resources that really can give us a lot of insight and skills to help us develop. So my last question for you is, do you have any favorite quotes?
Too many. There's actually a quote somewhere about people who hoard quotes, and all the folks that I interviewed for my book, they all had like little collections of these quotes that they carried around, and one actually had a quote that he had carried in Vietnam. He had written on a piece of paper and eventually laminated it, but he still carries it to this day, from Martin Luther King Jr. So, yeah, there are a bunch. One that's actually part of it's on a tile in my office at the hospital and it's only part of it, but it's from Goethe, who was a German theologian philosopher. And the entire quote in English is, treat a man as he is and that he will remain, treat him as he can be and that he will become. And so I think that sums up kind of my purpose statement. There are others. I think one that's perhaps really apropos at this point is from General S.L.A. Marshall. And the man who scorns all others and thinks no one else worth following parades his own inferiority before the world. So that's another good one. I've got a bunch, hundreds probably. I have a file, a Word document of notes from my readings on leadership, and that Word document is 250 pages long. So, and it's just got all this stuff in it. So anyway, yeah, so I have a lot.
Yeah, those are great quotes, though. Really fantastic. And the first one, especially, I think, like you said, is right in line with your purpose, your motivation. So fantastic that is there. That's in your office. It clearly is representative of who you are and what you believe and what you strive to do in all of your work. So Tom, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This discussion has been absolutely fantastic, and it has been great hearing about your leadership journey. You have certainly contributed to the leadership and professional development of many people through your book, your podcast, and your various roles. And I really, really appreciate you sharing your insight and expertise. I know that I'm personally really looking forward to reading your book, and I will definitely keep listening to the podcast. You and your guests continually share really meaningful and impactful information that can make us all better leaders. And I really hope our paths will cross again in the leadership and faculty development spaces. Good luck with all of your work, and thank you again for being here.
Thanks, Mary. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Thank you so much.